Our next story is about Android PCs. I mentioned at the top that Lenovo is talking about a new way to basically introduce ChromeOS without introducing the baggage of ChromeOS, I suppose. Um, I think it was last week, if I'm not mistaken. They talked about this new Android OS for PC. Again, not Chrome OS, which will eventually, I believe, combine Android at some sort. This is slightly different, but nevertheless, it's something that Lenovo wanted to do, and they're going to be offering these Lenovo PCs that are designed for that. I'm assuming specifically for businesses. I don't know if they're going to offer Android OS PC to compete against its own Chromebooks, at least commercially speaking. But nevertheless, it took only about a week, I think, and maybe it was just a little consternation within the tech industry asking, like, hey, what's the difference between this? Or how is this better or different than maybe just getting a cheap Windows PC? And Lenovo came out with a press release this week saying that, ladies and gentlemen, it's not better, it's different. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what they said. Their new bold vision for it basically comes down to that Android OS will be better for. Let me see if I get the actual quote for you guys. Uh, it is almost limitless in its flexibility, and it'll be great and efficient for taking advantage of battery life, updates of certain servers, accessibility to all your Android apps that you're currently using on your phone. So if you have a company app that you need to use that maybe only has an Android app because of its portability, mobility, or whatnot, you'll be able to use it on this laptop. There are a lot of times where there are niche or specific Android apps that are only made for Android and nowhere else. And sometimes you have to do a whole bunch of tinkering with I think it's a BlueStack or something like that in order to get the accessibility app because it's only triggered to hardware on a phone. Now you'll be able to do that on your desktop. So again, if you are out in the field and maybe your business uses a specific Android app to do warehouse inventory or something like that because it's only meant to be used on the phone, now you'll be able to kind of pull that up and sit down at your desktop and really dig into that. But like I said, for all the benefits of this thing, they eventually came out and said, you're still going to want to get a PC, a Windows-based PC, in order to do some of the more heavy lifting stuff from a productivity standpoint. I just wanted to write about this because, again, we don't know what this Android PC OS is going to look, or Android OS for PC is going to look like, or specifically what functions it makes it function different than a Chrome OS laptop. But they're already trying to set expectations. What are your thoughts on this? Because you and I had a conversation off mic about, hey, we already knew this. This is kind of the thing that we've been saying for almost a decade and a half now, almost two, I think, about Chrome OS, Android, and Google's attempts to make an operating system.
Well, I think it's time for it because I'll give you a good example. I've got a Lenovo Chromebook in my possession, and I have a Chromebook that I bought 2 or 3 years ago for a very specific use in my possession. And it's aggravating sometimes when you want to run an app and it says, oh, it's an Android app. You can't run it, but you can run something else, but so I feel like this is I don't want to say this is the Android way of becoming Apple. And I'm going to explain that. If you've got an Android PC there and an Android phone, in theory, they should communicate. The Android phones communicate very well with Chromebook, but there's still those gaps of certain apps run, certain apps don't, certain functions work, certain functions do not. So if we get to a place where you can combine those two, and then if we get to a place where developers start making commercialized apps, you've got competition, and I'm all for competition. I want to see, the more competition and the more pressure we can put on Apple and Microsoft to make better OSs, I think it's a win for everybody. We all know Apple needs to do some things better. We know Microsoft needs to do some things better. Chrome is not a bad operating system. I don't have a whole lot of complaints with Chrome, except for these gaps where it won't run certain apps that you expect it to run because they're Android based, and there is a large gap for commercialized apps because most things that you run on Chrome are web based. It just loads a browser in the background and takes you to whatever it is. For example, Google Docs. You click Google Docs on a Chromebook, you're clicking an icon, but it's going to load Chrome and it's going to take you to the website. So it's all about what developers do with it. And I hope developers grab it and run with it. But I also understand why Lenovo says, oh, you still need a Windows PC. Yes. What does Lenovo make the most of? How many licensings do they sell? I would expect Dell and Acer and Asus to say the same thing. You don't kill what pays the bills. So I get it.
I find it interesting too. Just one last note before we close this out. There's going to be a blending, such a grayness across the board for PCs and the functionality, because we have ChromeOS, which will adopt some aspects of Android in order to make it better, I suppose. And then there's Android OS for PC, whatever this is going to be. And then there's Windows PCs that use Snapdragon chips, which have made Android a viable alternative in the mobile market. So and I say that because a lot of the advantages that are held up for Android OS and PCs and for Chromebooks are starting to be offered for Windows-based operating systems. The battery life, the streaming capabilities, the productivity is already there. Again, aside from the accessibility to the vast number of Android apps, which again, if you can find them done as a PWA somewhere, you're right there on board. Windows PCs will have a lot of those advantages that Android OS PCs will have, and that Chrome OS has with some of the productivity advantages as well. And it's just going to really become like it's not going to be the divide it used to be, where it's like, hey, you don't have to worry about security, you don't have to worry about battery, you don't have to worry about ease of use when you get a Chrome OS book. Now you're going to have to say, all right, well, the battery life is negligible. Security in Windows, I believe, again, I know it's been a running joke for a long time, but I haven't had a breakdown, knock on wood, on a PC, I would say in the last 10 years or so. Like, I haven't had the blue screen of death. I haven't had any of that. Now, I've had issues with drivers, don't get me wrong. There's been some wonkiness with that. Display, it's kind of being off and things like that, but it hasn't been the Windows crashed, Windows got spam, Windows broke down situations that we've always been told about. So, and again, it's just anecdotal, but it feels like the only issue that I'm having with Windows PCs are essentially the battery life. And it feels like with the Snapdragon chipsets, that's going to be going the way, hopefully, of the Dodo. So we'll see.